So without further ado, let's start the session. So as some of you may know, so those of you who have attended these CIVICA seminars know, the CIVICA seminars are actually about tackling complex societal challenges through novel methodological and data-driven approaches through various disciplinary perspectives. And these seminars are hosted by various institutions such as Hertie, Bocconi, Sciences Po, EUI, and the Central European University, and obviously your host today, the London School of Economics. And today it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Andreas Jungherr. Andreas, forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Correct me in a second if it's mispronounced. And we have today a very, 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 very interesting talk about AI and democracy. And what there is no better time than this year to talk about AI and democracy, because there, as most of you know, there have been many, many, many advances in AI this year, and loads of fear around AI and its impact on democracy. And Andreas is particularly well placed to talk about this because he is a professor of political science and digital transformation at the Institute of Political Science at the University of Bamberg. And he researches the impact of digital media and artificial intelligence on politics and society. He has published a couple of books around the topic, such as Digital Transformations of the Public Arena, with his co-author Ralph Schroeder, and Retooling Politics, How Digital Media Are Shaping Democracy, with his co-authors Gonzalo Rivero and Daniel Gallo Avello. Without further ado, Andreas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here virtually, but I think the drawbacks of the virtual meeting is of course supplanted by or made up for by the European reach, or the cohabitation, or the digital cohabitation that we can experience. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk with you and reflect with you a little bit on the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy, and I think it's a very exciting area where there's a lot to do for political scientists, and I think it's an area where we actually can contribute quite a bit. So let me see if the screen sharing is working. So yes, I hope you see my presentation, or you see the slides. So I'm gonna present you with some thoughts that I had or tried to develop when thinking through how political scientists should kind of address these current fears or expectations regarding democracy. Because I think usually we as a field are rather, let's say, good or skilled in looking backwards. I think we're not so well placed to think forwards, or to think about eventualities or stuff that might happen. But of course, regarding artificial intelligence and democracy, I think most of the effects that we're thinking about are prospective, and I think it's interesting for political scientists to start thinking about that and how we can contribute there. Gita already mentioned some some elements of my person. So I'm a professor for digital transformation at the University of Bamberg, and I feel very fortunate to be able to focus on the topic of digital transformation in a political science department. I think that at least for Germany that is still rare. That there are kind of dedicated professorships that focus on these issues. Which I think is increasingly necessary, that we as a field take these areas or these technologies seriously, and also kind of develop a way of how we as political scientists would approach these topics, which are probably a little bit different, like computer scientists or communication scholars or sociologists might do so. I started out by thinking about how can we think about the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy and the public arena. And I think what is important there is to first start out to get a grip on the technology. So I'm not talking about the same grip that the computer scientists kind of skilled in deep learning might be having on the topic, but at least kind of a conceptual grip, so that we're clear what we're talking about when we're talking about the technology, and reflecting on its potential effects. And I think there we should be dealing with the technology and its setup a little bit and its underlying mechanisms. If we look at definitions, there is this rather helpful textbook by Russell and Norwich, Artificial Intelligence is a Modern Approach. And there they define artificial intelligence as the study and construction of agents that do the right thing. So I think there's already a nice definition that gets us started off. So it's about agents, or kind of artificial agents or machines that act. And if they act, they actually act purposefully and do the right thing. But what does the right thing mean in this context? And those of you more normatively inclined will be quick to point out that can mean a lot of things. So we can and we should specify that. And there's an interesting specification of that by Niels Nielsen in his History of Artificial Intelligence. And there he says artificial intelligence is that activity devoted to making machines intelligent, and intelligence is that quality that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight in its environment. And I think that's also interesting because we bring the term of intelligence into the mix, which if you're looking at the opinion sections of any newspaper or so, is usually points to the risks of focusing too much on intelligence there, because then we're suddenly talking about machines that are better at humans, that are superhuman in what they're doing, that they are that they replace humans by being intelligent. So there are risks if we move in that direction of intelligence too much. But if we define intelligence the way Nielsen does here, namely the quality that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight in its environment, then I think things become much more handable. So we are talking about an entity that functions, so that is able to do, that is able to act. And that functions appropriately, so it does the right thing. It knows how it should act in a given environment. It's context aware, and it has some foresight. So foresight allows the machine to act appropriately, because it knows or can project what type of action will create a given response, and what type of responses are actually desired and not desired. So again, we have a focus on machines that are acting, that are doing, that are producing, and that are doing so with foresight and appropriately in a given environment. Of course, that opens up a massive area of use. So currently we are basically used to daily bombarded with uses of artificial intelligence as kind of interfaces or chatbots, or kind of language machines that produce responses to inputs, and so. But if we think back a few years, we also see artificial intelligence in the context of gaming. We see it in the context of computer vision, or we also see it in robots. So even if we have such a restrictive definition of artificial intelligence, we already see that the areas of use of this restrictive definition are quite broad. It's also helpful in thinking through what enables artificial intelligence to develop foresight, or to predict or to project what consequences the actions will have, and that is of course prediction. And I feel there a book by three business scholars or management scholars, AJ Agrawal, Joshua Ganz, and Avi Goldfarb, is quite helpful there. In thinking through that, they're saying, okay, artificial intelligence are actually a set of technologies that have lowered the costs of prediction, that make prediction cheap. So if you're thinking about a chatbot is predicting what an appropriate response might be to a given prompt. So because that is cheap, we can now produce all these language interfaces that are projecting our appropriate responses. That is just, of course, one type of prediction. But what is important that, what allows us to do if we think about prediction there is not just the areas where artificial intelligence might be in use. It also allows us to think about the preconditions for artificial intelligence to become useful or to become prevalent in a given area. And that is, of course, an area where prediction is possible. So where we can form high quality or accurate prediction. And that, of course, means you need to have data, because without data, any sort of prediction becomes augury. And although that was popular a while back, I think nobody wants to go back to these times. So what we actually need is data that is documenting relationships and incidences of the past, where we can form patterns and use these patterns then to predict specific outcomes if we have missing information about something. Now, that then, of course, means if artificial intelligence or the success of artificial intelligence in specific areas is driven by the opportunities of prediction, then that also means we can use the preconditions for predictions to become prevalent in a field to then say, okay, to assess in what areas artificial intelligence might come to be successful or prominent in, and in what areas it doesn't. So it's necessary for an area for artificial intelligence to become prevalent there, that there's sufficient data that objectively document inputs and outputs. So the stuff that I want to predict stuff with and the stuff that I want to predict both need to be documented abundantly in data. There need to be stability, temporal stability between the relationships between the outputs and inputs. So if I identify a relationship in the past that I use to predict future behavior or future incidents, I have a hypothesis that the past relationship is continued into the future. And that is more plausible for specific events than others, as the engineers working on Google FluentGen might tell you. But we do not only speak about the stability or kind of the fact of stability, we also normatively must want to continue that relationship. So if you're thinking, for example, about crime statistics or so, you might actually find that these patterns are stable over time. But the question then becomes, do we want that? Do we really want police departments to still kind of surveil and predict based on police areas based on data from the 1970s and relationships about crime that they found there? Or do we actually say, okay, in the 1970s we did things differently there, and now for normative reasons we are actually trying to do things differently. We want to switch things up. So that then means that we have these three conditions, or at least these three conditions, that must hold for us to think about an artificial intelligence being prominent in a given area. And having these conditions, it's actually helpful to now look at patterns or elements of democracy that are relevant to us, whether these preconditions are holding there or where they don't. As any theorist of democracy might tell you, and they certainly have told me, the review process and then the feedback to this paper, the democracy is a multifaceted and very complex and contested theoretical concept within political science and political theory. And this is all well and good, but I think for our purposes we can reduce democracy or a little bit to some important areas that are important within different democratic theories or within the practice of democracy. And you could say on an individual level, there's an important element to democracy, which is self-rule. Then on the group level, there is the necessity for equality between groups. On the institutional level, we have elections and associated with that, the public arena. And on the systems level, there's always, of course, the conflict between democracy and autocracy. And I would argue these are four important areas. And then in all areas, we see different, we see contact between AI and democracy, albeit to somewhat different degrees. I would argue that the area where we see already the strongest impact of artificial intelligence, or the strongest uses of artificial intelligence, is the area of self-rule. And if we now say that democracy depends on self-rule of the people being governed, then that also means that we must hold that individuals should be able to express and form political opinions. And AI is actually influencing both of those. So if we're looking at the space where a lot of our politics is currently negotiated, or where a lot of political information is flowing through and people are forming opinions, this is the digitally mediated public arena. And there we see that these communication spaces that form the digitally mediated public arena are very heavily shaped or moderated through artificial intelligence, or processes that in the past we maybe called somewhat less grandiose kind of algorithms and machine learning. But of course, these are processes that are basically strongly connected with the current ideas of artificial intelligence. And what we see there is that there are multiple technologies that we know exist and are used, but are not sure as of now as to their degree or their impact, because these platforms are rather intransparent, which is rather opaque, which is a strong problem there. But we already see that AI plays a role, and different AI technologies play a role of whether you're able to voice your political opinion or opinions in these communication spaces. So this can happen through AI upload filters, that your content is already filtered out based on the probability of it violating specific rules. But it can also be the moderation, AI moderation, or AI-based moderation, that after you publish a content, then it's kind of made invisible also, because it might be violating a given rule. Both of these are often discussed under the context of safety, which is of course a valid point. But then on the other hand, it's also, of course, these are probabilistic procedures that might punish some form of political speech or challenge to the political status quo more than others, or maybe centrist speech or so. So there might be an argument that because of the nature of the technology, there might be some filtering out happening of marginal voices or challenging voices. which would be, of course, a problem for the functioning of the public arena. Similar, we also have artificial intelligence in the context of moderating information flows. So what type of content gets amplified, which content gets maybe kind of slowed down a little bit, what becomes visible and what disappears. That is again kind of vulnerable to some of the concerns raised now. Also, a rather newish phenomenon is AI as access point to the public arena. So for the last few years, we have learned how to discuss these questions of moderation, these questions of information flows. But what is happening right now is that maybe you do not access the public arena through a medium of choice or through your social media provider of choice, but you access that through chatbot. Or you access it through AI-based search. So which means that you're basically asking a question and the AI is producing you an answer. So if you're asking Google, or if you're querying Google for the most important news of the day, Google in the past would have provided you a list with 10 sources that are discussing that or pointing you to that. Now through an AI-enabled search, you would actually find an kind of a summary of these points, or kind of a AI structured answer to that. And that is, of course, on the one hand, there is the question of accuracy with any probabilistic text production mechanism, but there's also the question of monetization. So in the past, if you clicked on a site, then the site was able to monetize your attention through ads. That of course disappears if AI is accessing that content and producing an answer for itself. So you're not clicking through the provider of the information, but you're remaining purely on the level of the AI provider, which then of course means that the economic basis for a lot of the marginal or the fragmented public arena that we're currently experiencing might shift. Now, given our recent experiences with fragmented public arenas in the US and sometimes also in the UK, we might actually be not so concerned about that by saying, okay, maybe then attention focuses on the large information providers. But I would argue that is probably thinking a little bit too narrowly on our more recent experiences with authority challenging information or voices. It might be that in a few years' time we're exactly needing this, or we need a more vibrant and critical public arena, and then maybe AI is shifting that to more centralized voices simply through monetization opportunities or transforming those. Next to structures of the public arena or structures of information flow, I would also argue that AI plays a role is often discussed in the context of persuasion and manipulation, and we see there a lot of excitement, usually with political consultants and those critical of political consultants, but both are basically in the same game, hyping up the opportunities of technology for manipulation. Some want to get paid manipulating people, other wants to get paid critiquing people manipulating people. So there's a certain balance in that specific game. But there, specifically, large language models have been used in creating virtual focus groups. They might be used, or transformer models might be used in generating variations of different content that could be produced. And potentially it could also be used for misinformation by simply making it cheaper to produce content and flooding information arenas. I think there's good reason to be critical about the actual powers of artificial intelligence for persuasion and manipulation. And maybe we can talk about those during the questions. But as we have seen with disinformation or the disinformation threat, sometimes it's enough that people are scared of something for it to develop negative effects without it being efficient of doing that. So it could be that it's enough for AI to create the strong impression of being highly effective in manipulating people for negative effects to appear, namely delegitimizing political decisions at elections. And it's really does not necessarily matter how effective AI really is in that. So we believe in the power of manipulation in AI, and that might give us then the pretense of then saying, okay, I do not have to accept this election result because people were manipulated in doing so, and that would be, of course, a highly negative context, especially in times when people are surprisingly open to restricting democratic processes or democratic decision making anyway. Then kind of the idea of technology making people even worse at deciding for themselves politically, as they are arguably already, then that might strengthen that case and weaken democracy. Another area, now if we're moving from the individual a little bit to the group, is of course equality and fairness. So we see that already, and there's a very rich literature, especially in sociology, on the impact of algorithms, quantification, metrification on fairness. It might simply be because artificial intelligence, through its data-driven learnings, tends to be rather conservative technology. So as in it continues patterns found in the past into the future. And sometimes we want that, and sometimes we decidedly do not want that. So if you're thinking about society and democracy as a process that is slowly kind of increasing rights, that is slowly extending of who is part of our democratic populace or contributor to that, then of course a conservative technology that is looking at patterns from the past is highly problematic, because it's potentially continuing discriminatory practices and injustices into the future, which we as societies are now deciding or have decided in counteracting. So I think one needs to be very careful in applying that and thinking that through for which type of uses it's helpful and for which it doesn't. And of course, as the state as a service provider is I think very well placed to be careful in thinking that through and interrogating that. There's also an argument more than on the from the economic side that AI might potentially weaken the role of workers and weaken therefore also their political representation by replacing labor through capital or through machines in that context. That is somewhat contested. So newer papers are actually pointing out that AI or automated industries are increasing work. Then the game becomes, is it work that we would like to do or not? But I think that is still very ongoing discussion in the field of economics, and one shouldn't be too quick in expecting that that AI necessarily leads to replacement and therefore also to a weakening of the role of labor. Especially if we think through that a lot of Western democracies are facing kind of demographic decline, and where they are then kind of smart deployment of automation technology might actually help societies to overcome work or labor shortages or so, and then again allow a society to grow and then also be more generous in the context of redistribution and balancing of that. So I would argue it's not at all clear how this is impacting equality and fairness, although it's a process that of course needs to be monitored and taken seriously. moving one step up from the groups now to the level of institutions. And of course, as political scientists, we get very excited if we're talking about institutions. So if we're then talking about AI and institutions that are basically structuring democracy and structuring democratic competition and conflict, it's also an area where AI might weaken some of these institutions. So I already said that AI might further weaken the news as an institution, as an information provider, as an information creator, as a monitor of politics, because it's also impacting the economic foundation of news production, which might weaken the institution of news in this. How does it look with AI and the other big institution in democracy, elections? Here I would be more optimistic, because if we think about elections, and some colleagues from the study of elections might see things a little differently, but I would argue that voting decisions, or to predict voting decisions on the individual level, is rather problematic, and I won't probably change that game all that much, simply because it's either very easy to predict somebody's vote choice, namely if they state it, or if they register for a given party, or if they're engaging in campaigning, then it's very easy to predict that. Or it's very, very hard or difficult to predict that if they don't do that, because we basically have too little information about their, or too little objective information about the actual vote choice, because it's not documented. Now that, of course, then makes it a difficult predictive target. Also, elections are usually happening rather seldom. I think in the UK they're going for a more intensive voting cycle in recent years, but let's see if they can keep that up, or things quiet down. But usually we predict only every 4 years, so it's a difficult prediction target, and AI itself won't make that much easier. It might be different with different aspects of campaigning. It might be, if we're thinking about not predicting for whom you vote, or for whom a person would vote, but if you would predict, is that person likely to turn up to vote, or is that person likely to donate? So these are information that in some systems we have. So if you're thinking about the US, we know who voted in which elections, and campaigns also know who donated to them, and who donated what, and after what type of intervention. So these are informations in campaigns or in elections that we can predict, or that we can collect more data about, that we can document objectively, and then also potentially run models on that and improving on that. Will that then change elections as such? Probably not, because it's potentially open to all parties engaging in that. So it's probably something where maybe sometimes a party or faction might gain an advantage over another, but that advantage can then also be, it's probably kind of a shifting advantage, giving kind of innovation incentives, and so that might not transform elections as such, on a fundamental level. It might also be used, as already said in the persuasion and manipulation slide, it might also be used for message testing. So can artificial intelligence produce better on more targeted information, or more persuasive messages? That might be the case. But as we know from a lot of the literature on campaigning and political information, an actual challenge there is maybe not kind of having the most persuasive message, but reaching people in the first place. So how can I reach people who are not already politically engaged, that are not open to political information, and there again, artificial intelligence might not be helpful in solving this problem for us. I would argue there might be a risk regarding news as an institution or the public arena as an institution, simply giving the technological kind of structuring or shaping of these structures and the economic basis and transforming that, but probably not so much for elections. This, of course, could change if we experience massive attempts at deception or doing election campaigns. Then it might be that people lose the acceptance of then saying, okay, my side lost, but I accept that finding. There might be that collective collective illusion that an election was lost because of manipulation, and therefore one doesn't have to accept the result, and that of course would be a rather bad outcome for a democracy and democratic institutions. Now, on the highest level, or on the highest level that we address today, I would argue artificial intelligence might impact the way or might impact the competition between autocracies and democracies on a systems level. And how does that come about? Now, we would argue, or a lot of people have argued that, except for normative reasons, there's also kind of an epistemological reason why democracies are more successful than autocracies, simply because they're the better information processors. So in democracies, we're usually focusing on the weaknesses of a noisy public arena, the weaknesses of democratic decision making. But if we look at the track record of democracies, they're actually better at identifying problems and then also solving problems and finding ways of dealing with that and allocating resources than autocracies are. And one reason for that is that they might actually be very strong in surfacing necessary information and acting on that. Now, there's an argument out there, and let me preface that by saying it's an argument. It's not proven, and it's highly contested. That AI might allow autocracies to overcome that information disadvantage. So by using AI more effectively and more deeply than democracies, autocracies might become better at planning and at resource allocation, and therefore might be better at solving problems than democracies, and therefore might epistemologically become more stronger competitors there. Again, this is an argument, and it's usually played out by the usual suspects in this game of kind of modernization and systems conflict. So I'm not sure how serious that is. But if it, of course, would be true that autocracies are better at implementing AI or better realizing the opportunities of AI, then they might be better to realize the potential of AI for economic growth in war and conflict, and also maybe also regarding the quality of life. So if you're thinking about currently living in the EU, the costs of the EU data protection for you is basically having to click a few cookie banners away every time you start your computer. That is annoying, but probably not a reason to move or to emigrate. But if suddenly an autocracy might be better in realizing predictive medicine, and it's suddenly extending your your chances of time of life by having better medical care there or specialized medical care, then suddenly immigrating might not seem such a bad idea, especially if you're economically well off, and autocracies tend to be rather lenient to this sort of the population. So if that would be true, then that of course could also be a weakening of democracies within this conflict. So what can be done? I think all this shows that there's a lot happening between artificial intelligence and democracy. So a lot of there's a lot happening that actually fits within the purview of political science. I think we first should work to greater accessibility of AI-based systems in politics, and I use the term accessibility here consciously, and do not use the term transparency here, because I would argue accessibility is more. It's not just having information about something; it's also being able to do something with that, to assess that meaningfully. And I think that means that that we as a society, as also political leaders and also scientists, need to become better at that. But also in the start, companies and governments need to be more open in how they use this and how they measure effects. This is an inherently interdisciplinary effort. So actually there's a lot of work already done in this area by sociologists and computer scientists. Ignoring that would be not only bad form, but also would limit us. So I think building on that work and working interdisciplinary on that is highly sensible, especially since I would argue political science could or would profit from opening our traditional fields of inquiry and interest a little bit, and engaging with these fields, at least in my personal experience, has been rather stimulating and helpful. Based on these activities, we need to build media literacy. Media literacy is usually something that we talk about when we talk about schools program or what should be taught in schools. But I would argue we also need media literacy on the level of politicians, regulators, and scientists. So if you look at a lot of the frankly rather foolish commentary on a lot of the potential impact of digital media on politics, also a lot of that is built on rather low media literacy by scientists who suddenly venture into this field and then say, okay, look, I'm an expert in other areas, so I can talk here as well. I would say we need to avoid this, and also as a field need to become better at this. And finally, of course, we need governance in this area, but governance also needs to be evidence-based. So if you think about a lot of the activity that now disinformation or the perceived effects of disinformation on politics has, that is rather evidence-free. And I'm not necessarily sure that this is the best way of regulating crucial technologies that we build our public infrastructure on or discourse on. So we need governance, but that governance needs to be evidence-based, and more strongly evidence-based than it currently tend to be. Yeah, this was a lot, and a lot of words, some of them more ordered than others. If you want to delve deeper into the topics, there are two articles that I and a colleague, Ralf Schröder, wrote on artificial intelligence and democracy and artificial intelligence in the public arena. There you also find a lot of sources to very interesting and stimulating reading that might actually deepen the conversation to be had. So that's it for now, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for a very, very interesting talk. And I see there's already a question for you from Anastasia. So do you want me to read out the question, or?
Yeah, let's get going. Yeah.
Okay. So Anastasia, do you want me to read out the question, or do you want to actually unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? Which one do you prefer? Okay, so I'll just read out the question. So Anastasia is asking, so what do you think about the AI Act? How do you think it will influence the development of AI? And do you think it will potentially slow down the development of AI-based technologies in the EU and give a competitive advantage to the US businesses or more authoritarian countries like China or Russia?
I would argue the first draft of the AI Act would have done exactly that by basically prohibiting AI development. So I would argue that the current version is a much better much better version there. If I'm talking to people in the space who are trying to develop business solutions based on that, they're actually saying it's helping them by having a set of rules that they can adapt to. So they know what is allowed and what isn't allowed, and that actually allows them to develop these services better. I was somewhat skeptical regarding the rhetoric that there was always this this little game where we are the quickest to have an AI draft out. Not sure that this is really a game of speed, but I think the outcome is definitely better than it could have been, and having a set of rules, building on a set of rules, and also leaving companies and service providers also the way of defining the way of risk that they feel that they contribute to is actually rather flexible. So I would say it's better at the alternatives.
Thank you, Andreas. And we already have the next question from Aditya. So he's saying, he's starting by thanking you for the presentation, and he's asking you if you could please share more about the evidence-based nature of governance. And do we have any examples of this being done in any country?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there has been, I mean, not being a policy researcher myself, so forgive me for not pointing you to the pertinent readings on this or references on that, but actually there has been, I would say, a lot of activity in that space, also connected with the role of experiments or controlled experiments in political science, and I would say that starts in the 2000s, and so where experiments or experimental approaches are also used to evaluate the impact of specific regulation or governance interventions. If I'm now thinking about something like disinformation, there my feeling is that there's a lot of evidence produced and that also a lot of kind of funder activity to mitigating potential effects of disinformation or of counter arguing there, but there's very little money spent on actually trying to assess the size of the problem, so the reach of the disinformation and the causal effects that might have. So I would argue in that specific sense, we would need more empirical findings on the size of the problem and trying to assess that, and a little less activity on the communicative aspects or communicative interventions and their effects. And there I would say that regulation kind of started out by having more kind of a collectively warm feeling about the dangers of disinformation and the reach of disinformation. But not necessarily through robust empirical evidence, and there I would wish for more evidence.
Just to pick up on this point of misinformation and well, disinformation, because you raised those points several times. Or, well, actually, I'll come back to this because we have yet another question by Chandas, I think. So he says, regarding the idea that sometimes actual disinformation isn't needed and a credible threat from AI will suffice, a thought experiment regarding that: using synthetic disinformation about potential of some thought, a large-scale stock market manipulation is precipitated. People get seriously hurt economically, but again, as a distrust is generated about market rewards generally, maybe that sentiment can be channeled towards a demand for something like universal basic income. Basically, if you can share your thoughts a bit more about the possibility of politics as AI interacts with the political economy. Also, any suggested readings regarding the same. And it would be great if you can show again the penultimate slide about those two articles.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I mean, in general, artificial intelligence is part of a discursive discursive factor on how the world is working. So and as such, it's of course impacting the way people perceive their role in society without necessarily experiencing that. Because I mean, thing with artificial intelligence is that it's very, very difficult to actually show where it's already used and really kind of reliably identify effects. So it's an awesome space for narratives and speculation. So if you're thinking about a similar situation like that, like Cambridge Analytica a few years ago, again, that was a space that was mainly discursive and dare I say imagined, on an imagined threat that was highly difficult to disprove. But that proved rather evocative, and artificial intelligence, or the impact of artificial intelligence on elements like stock market moves. And I mean, we haven't called that artificial intelligence, but if you go back 10 or 15 years, you have high frequency trading, which is algorithmically enabled, which is exactly doing that, and potentially impacting specific types of investors. There you could imagine that this becomes such a strong threat, or the threat scenario that's connecting with other narratives about exploitation or inequality or missed chances, that it can impact or strengthen these already existing fault lines. So I would argue it plays a role there. So if you're thinking about the economic, or the economic or political economy of that, I think there then the question or the rub will really be how it's impacting the actual economy. So will artificial intelligence increase jobs and productivity, or will it replace that? And there I think the discussion among the economists is rather heated at the moment, with people like Darren Acemoglu on one side, who is saying it will probably lead to a replacement, and then people like David Autor on the other side, who are then more open to then saying, okay, it will lead to other jobs and more of those. And I think that needs to be observed. But my feeling is that the replacement narrative is rather strong, although the evidence of that is increasingly contested. And regarding the slides, let me see if I still find them. So yeah, those are then the two articles, Artificial Intelligence Democracy, but you find them also both on my website if you
we can maybe share those links if you send
yes
them.
yeah I'm very happy to also share the slides, so that's no issue.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, maybe time for one last question. Otherwise, yeah, maybe I'll come back to that question that I started asking you. Yeah, no, because you raised that point during the presentation about misinformation, disinformation, and there's been this whole discourse about, well, those fears about deep fakes, obviously, like the deep fake that involved President Biden, obviously, and that Slovakian candidate during the elections. And there is obviously that whole discourse about manipulation, obviously with that cliched example by now of Cambridge Analytica. And you were saying that these fears may be a bit overblown. So can you maybe say a little bit more about that in maybe one short minute?
Yes. So I think, I mean, of course we're in an arena where there are actors who are interested in manipulating us in somewhat less than open ways. But I would argue that we have rather strong kind of institutional guidelines of that. So if you think about the Biden robocall, so first of all, it didn't come from the Republicans, if I'm correctly informed, but it came from a competing Democratic candidate. So it's Democrat on Democrat violence, what is happening there. So that's interesting. But also, if you look at that, the media was very, very quick in pointing that out and amplifying that. So So I would argue that this this fear of that, of course, there will be people who try that out. Those people will be probably punished quite severely. So there will be a strong backlash against exactly that sort of behavior. And also it will be captured and covered quite extensively. So I'm not so afraid of that. If you look at an example like Cambridge Analytica, so I'm more afraid actually about the coverage of these things. So if we look at the evidence that is available on Cambridge Analytica, then they apparently did very, very little during the Trump campaign, because they apparently weren't able to run a website. So they then were politely didn't get any more jobs to do. So they had more time to prepare their PR campaign after the election was done. And that was very readily picked up as we as a society became more willing to talk critically about platforms and challenging platforms. So what was happening there is then, I would argue, is a misperception about the role of Cambridge Analytica and also the impact that Cambridge Analytica had on the vote. Because we as a society were loving that narrative so much, and we were ready to amplify that narrative because it allowed us to justify more and stricter regulation against the platforms, which might be a desirable goal, to be sure. But probably it's best to justify or legitimize regulation based on facts instead of collective imagination. Or hallucination, as we might say with artificial intelligence. And there my fear would be that that regarding elections, we come to think about the negative aspects of artificial intelligence much more strongly than the positive and mobilizing aspects that artificial intelligence might have for campaigns, and allowing them to do a better job, reaching more people, mobilizing people who have disengaged from politics, and experiment. And I think that is what we actually need: parties who are able to navigate these very, very challenging communication environments that we have right now, and so to avoid that people check out, or only check into highly selective information feeds, and anything that helps campaigns like that, or that allows them to experiment with tools to do that better, is, I think, a net positive. But if we only talk about the deceptive potential there, or the misinformation potential there, then we will guarantee that parties will not experiment with that, because they fear the backlash that is associated with that. And then we as a society lose out on a tool that might make politics and campaigns more engaging and actually broaden representation there.
Yeah. And 30 seconds, very last question, because we got one from Anastasia. Do you know any examples where AI has been used, or in theory can be used positively? Example, to enhance political processes, improve governance, foster civic engagement, contribute to transparency, policymaking, or public participation?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's always difficult to assess effects, but if we're looking at a lot of the campaigns in Southeast Asia, for example, or in Taiwan, there we see that candidates are using deepfakes to make them appeal more to younger populations by kind of turning up as fantasy animals or something like that. I'm not sure about the actual effects that this has on moderation, but if we're talking about, I mean, we talked during the European election a lot of, well, why is the right-wing populist so popular on TikTok? And so I could imagine that if our established or politicians from the center might be more willing to experiment with that and play around with that, then their TikTok engagement might rise, and that might then help us to get some of the youth back.
Oh, and just to add on to that, 10 seconds. Anastasia, here in the UK, for the general elections, there is a candidate who has an AI avatar. So it's an independent candidate. His avatar is called AI Steve. And I think, if I'm correct, he's a candidate for Bristol or Brighton, one of the two. I can send a link to that later. So with this, we conclude this session for today. Thank you again very much, Andreas, for concluding the series for this academic year so brilliantly. Thank you again.